I was hired to direct a TV special that would resurrect his once great career.
This special was going to be his make or break special.
He was scared to death.
It's a great American original finding himself again.
How are you, Steve?
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
You're looking fantastic.
Well, I'll take any compliment at this stage of my life and age.
I got to say something, Steve. The world and all the Elvis fans out there, thank you so much for making this documentary, right, and telling your story, Reinventing Elvis, the 68 comeback documentary film, because everything happened in 68. But isn't it amazing that now you can tell the story in 2023 in this documentary film? How great is that?
Well, I think it's fantastic because if for no other reason, I've got 9 grandkids and a great-grandchild and a lot of family of my 2 daughters, Dana and Rami. And, it's such a pleasure seeing their reaction as if I had just shot it and it was initially just being released for the first time.
Well, I saw it and I thought it was incredible. And I like the way how the intro comes on and it goes, Elvis is the star. You're the hero and the Colonel is the villain. I like that. It's like a little storybook. And then you get right into it. And the way how you and Elvis made that bond, and you sort of brought him out of nowhere and said, listen, let's do it this way. And after doing all those movies, and even though people liked the movies, they were corny movies, and you could see that Elvis really wanted to be the real Elvis with you.
Yeah, I found him acknowledging the fact that, it was now time for the Beatle invasion. Mick Jagger and the Stones had come over to the United States, and Elvis was concerned that his time had passed him up, especially with young people. And so he knew going into this whole thing, it was sort of a make or break special. And he asked me, what happens if it bombs? And I said, Elvis, you'll still be remembered for your early hits, especially when you did the Ed Sullivan Show in the United States. You did all these movies, and I'm sure there are millions of your movie fans, even though I considered them sort of B movies. He was much greater than the material presented him, in my opinion. Though I did like Viva Las Vegas with Anne Margaret. I thought that was well done. But think of the positive. Think if it's a hit. Every door that was closed to you will now reopen, and you can do anything you want to do. And so from the very beginning, we kind of bonded. And I think one of the reasons that we bonded so quickly, when he came to a meeting at my office on the Sunset Strip in Hollywood, he saw my partner was a top record producer at the time, Bones Howe. And we were, as a company, exclusively producing all the hit records for the Fifth Dimension, the Association. Bones was in the studio at the time with Laura Nyro, cutting a single called Save the Country, which would be very appropriate for today's world. And so it was really a case of where he said, hey, I'm not just dealing with a television guy. These guys are speaking my language. And one of the first things he told me is how much he hated television after he did Sullivan and a couple of other projects on TV. Because in the 60s in America, television in prime time, especially variety, was dominated by middle-of-the-road singers like Perry Como and Andy Williams, or all of our top comedians like Milton Berle, and Steve Allen had a primetime show at the time. And they all kind of used him as a foil to make fun of. And he really kind of resented that, especially when Steve Allen presented him in a tuxedo in front of a real hound dog, live one, on a table. And he was embarrassed by that. And he said, I just don't want to do television it's not my turf. And I said, what's your turf? And he said, making rock and roll records. And I said, then you make a rock and roll record and I'll put pictures to it. How's that? And he told me much later, and that is the line in our very first meeting that really convinced him he was in the right hands and was willing to go all out to make this a success.
That's fantastic, but he must have seen the Tammy Show at some stage for sure. I mean, that's one of the greatest rock and roll documentaries you can do.
Well, I was very, very fortunate at the time. You know, who would have thought, especially in 1964, I think is when we made it, who would have thought that out of all the artists that appeared in the Tammy Show, which was a feature film, not a TV project, that almost all of them, with the exception of one or two at the most, are in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland, Ohio today. And you couldn't have programmed that, or even even if you were, you know, if you had the sixth sense to predict the future, which none of us really have, nobody would have predicted that all these acts would become superstars. I remember I was doing a show in 1965. It was the first primetime rock and roll show on the network in America on the East Coast called Hullabaloo. And on the West Coast, they were doing another contemporary show called Shindig. We were kind of friendly competition, but I remember a group of us sitting around a table having coffee, and somebody said, "What are these rock and roll guys going to do when they get 50 or 60 years old?" you got the Stones in their 70s or 80s going out on a rock tour right now. I mean, you'll find all these old acts that I grew up with still performing and still finding venues that really have an audience for them, whether they're local clubs or bars or what have you. And I find it not only amazing, but you know, every generation, the kids want to invent something new that their parents aren't doing. So they go to fashion, they go to music, and you know, certainly previous to the rock and roll invasion and the English invasion of artists, it was all middle of the road, top 40 kind of songs, and great ones. We had great singers, obviously, like Sinatra and Tony Bennett and Dick Damone, and but they never sang songs with the edge that rock and roll brings to the youth market. And I still love it, even with rap and all the new music that's coming in now. I still go back to those days of the 50s, 60s, when it all began. And we were just in it for fun. We weren't in it because we thought it would be a big, you know, revenue source. It was run by creative people, where today I think you have to have an MBA from college to even get a job in the mailroom, you know, at these big corporations. And the bottom line today is the almighty dollar, unfortunately. And artists are really struggling to figure out how to make a living. And you know, I had the good fortune of being around. I remember on Hullabaloo, I was the first show, we had Judy Collins on the show. And she said, you know, I'm staying at the Warwick Hotel in New York, and I want to introduce you to somebody. And I happen to be staying at the Warwick myself. And so after the show, we walked over to the hotel from NBC, which was in Rockefeller Center. And who's sitting on her bed in fully clothed, but with a t-shirt on or an undershirt, was Stephen Stills. And that was the first time I ever heard the name Stephen Stills. And you know, she had I don't know what kind of relationship they had, but she told me how great a artist he was, and boy, she nailed it. And I've tried in my own career. I had a wonderful Australian partner who unfortunately recently passed away, Robbie Porter. And I think in Australia, he was known as Robbie G as a guitarist himself. And I think he was really a great steel guitar player. And Robbie produced, and I got involved with him, and we formed a company bringing Australia artists to America. Instead of having them go to England first to get a hit record if they could, and then America would get to know them and see them. But acts like Olivia Newton-John and the Bee Gees and what have you. And, we brought Rick Springfield when he was like just a young kid. I think he wasn't even 19 when we brought him over here. And, that kind of opened the door to my introduction to all the talent that existed in Australia that was basically unexploited. And so I had some great years in the 70s with Daddy Cool. There were just so many incredible acts, Russell Morris, and so forth. And I made many a trip. We owned a record company at the time, which Robbie changed the name from Sparmac to Wizard Records. And we had quite a few hits. And but it was all fun in those days. It was mono. Nobody had even thought of stereo in those early days. And you were lucky if you were able to mix a record on 8-track, let alone today when they're using hundreds of open tracks to record the instruments and the orchestra and so forth.
The other thing with your career, Steve, you're at the right place at the right time, but not only that, you weren't aware that you were making music history, that everything you did, these projects, will live on forever in pop culture. And they're there, and they're always going to be there, and you can't go back. And that's the most amazing thing with your career. Everyone caught on with your success as you went along, but you were cutting edge. Even now, to keep the story about the real story of Elvis and the 68 comeback special from 1968, and now with a new, as I said, music documentary, we want everyone to go out there and see it, Reinventing Elvis, the 68 comeback documentary film. I saw it and I was in awe. And it took all this time. Now Elvis fans are so excited because they're going to know your story.
Well, I think I have to thank Baz Luhrmann, who really opened the door with his feature film on Elvis. And that revitalized it's been over 50 years since originally telecast was the first Elvis, what they moniker now as the comeback special. But I had received over the years maybe 100 Elvis books that people had written about the 68 special, but it was all third-party information. Nobody had really sat down with me. There were a few phone interviews and so forth, but as I kept reading these books and seeing the movie of the weeks on television that the Dick Clarks produced, I said, nobody's told the real story because nobody was there. And even today, I think there are 4 of us from the original group of my creative family that surrounded me when I did the Elvis special are even alive today. I still have communication with Alan Bly, one of our writers. His partner, Chris Beard, passed away, unfortunately. Gene McAvoy, our art director, is still around. And Jaime Rogers, who was one of 2 choreographers I used on that special. And Jaime was, at the time I met him, he was starring on Broadway with Sammy Davis in a boxing musical called Golden Boy. And then Petula Clark, I had done her special with Harry Belafonte right before I did Elvis. And she introduced me to Claude Thompson, who had choreographed for her and Fred Astaire the Finian's Rainbow feature film. And she recommended Claude to me, and Claude had a classical background of ballet and so forth, and I thought he'd be perfect for the gospel segment. So I hired both of them as choreographers, told them they could both hire 15 dancers apiece. So we had 30 dancers on the special, and they chose as their dance companies people who had backgrounds in the kind of material that they were choreographing. So I was very, very lucky. I'd have worked with that whole group for the rest of my career if I could have, but they all went on to bigger success themselves, and it's impossible to hold on to them. And I've been very fortunate being surrounded my entire career by the most talented people behind the lens, as well as the stars in front of it. And I was never intimidated by any of them. I always felt we were there as a team. It was never they were the star and I was the hero or the director, producer. It was really a case of forgetting our titles, and just digging in and trying to make the best product we could possibly come up with. And that went all the way through my career. I've had a very eclectic career of different genres, just as much as Elvis had musically. Elvis loved the black church. Every chance he got, he spent listening to gospel in black churches and so forth. And, Elvis had, aside from rock and roll, he had a good taste of other forms of music of that era. And I think it all added to being able to do something that wasn't a one-note concept. It really, and especially when I fell into seeing and being able to record the acoustic segment in the special, that was the heart and soul of the special. And it was, for me, it was something I had to get on tape. And the Colonel kept fighting, saying nobody gets to record this. And nobody had up till '68. And it was so refreshing to see him relaxed. It was a stroke of genius when Elvis said, as long as we're going to recreate it and the Colonel won't let us into the dressing room to film it, do you think it'd be possible to get DJ Fontana, my original drummer, and Scotty Moore, my original guitarist, to come out and play with me? Well, I didn't realize how important the significance of that really turned out to be, because the minute they started to reminisce, there was no rehearsals. That was true improv and true, acoustic, where they just picked up from the day before they were together, which was maybe for sure over 10 years before they had even seen each other, let alone played or jammed together. And it was like magical. I think if I just had two great musicians in their place, but no relationship of Elvis's roots, it would have never come off the way it did. I mean, I think they all forgot they were taping a television special and just having the time of their life. Ironically, after I turned the special in and it broadcast on NBC, they never talked to each other again. They never, both DJ and Scotty told me they never spoke to Elvis. And that surprised me, because I thought I had brought them back and they could bond again, because they loved each other so much.
He went back to his roots, and you caught lightning in a bottle. That's what it was. And the amazing thing is, this is what Elvis fans have to understand. It's your story now out there with Reinventing Elvis that they got to go and see it. It's like, unless you see it, you don't know the story. And the story is so intricate with so many problems that Colonel Parker gave you for no reason. I reckon that was just a tussle for power.
But, the one thing that I don't mention a lot in these kind of interviews is that once I started actually doing the show. Chris Beard and Alan Bly, my writers, went to a famous music store in Hollywood, and I told them, just buy any Elvis record you can find, whether it's 33 1/3, 45, 78, I don't care, just bring them all back to the office and start programming the material on the show from actual Elvis songs and albums and so forth. And what the public probably doesn't realize is that once I started production and submitted this concept instead of a prearranged deal that Colonel Parker made with NBC to do a Christmas show with 20 songs in it, which I had never had any intentions of doing. I wasn't even sure I wanted to work with Elvis when this all began. And but once I started production on it, nobody said anything to me about where's the Christmas special, not even the Colonel. And you know, so I had little or no interference whatsoever to execute the concept. And the show was kind of fraught with problems only because the Colonel was only interested in his authority of being the only person in Elvis's life who could make a decision. And I was a real challenge to him, obviously. You know, when you know, I had the greatest executive producer in the world with Bob Finkel. Bob was a 50s variety producer and director, and he was kind of at the height of his career when I met up with him. And NBC actually wanted him to produce and direct it, and he turned it down, saying, I can't do it. You know, when I met Elvis, he only calls me Mr. Finkel. He won't call me Bob. And I got to find a young guy who can relate to him, and he can relate to the person that I choose. And that's when he saw the Petula Harry Belafonte special and came after me. And but it was really a case of where my problems were never with Elvis or the crew or the people we hired to participate in the show. As a matter of fact, it was the opposite. They were so much fun and such a pleasure to direct and work with. And you know, my only real problem was, you know, the authority of the Colonel thinking he was, you know, in control, and NBC. None of them gave a damn about the creative side of the show. They were only interested in getting it on the air, exploiting his name, and you know, they had prearranged before I ever entered the picture that Elvis was going to do a Christmas special like you know, Andy Williams or Perry Como or any of the artists of that day who were middle of the road, and the Colonel was going to change his rock and roll image into a middle of the road a ballad singer. And you know, it was something. I was shocked when, from the very first moment that I met Elvis, we bonded. And he said you know, especially when I was able to pitch him with Chris and Alan, my writers, the concept that we came up with. I said, is there anything that you don't like or you want us to change or anything? And Elvis said, no, I love it all. Let's do it. You know, and I said, I never worked with an artist who didn't have some suggestions for changes, but he said, no, I love it. Let's just, you know, let's go to work. And we did. And the only time I ever saw Elvis upset during the entire production was I came into dance rehearsal one afternoon in the dance hall, and Elvis was sitting on a bench watching the dancers, and I could tell he was upset. And I sat on the bench next to him, and I said, "What's going on?" And he said, "Oh, I'm upset." And I said, "What's wrong?" And he said, "Bob Finkel said I used too much black dye in my hair." What do you think? That was the only time ever that there was anything, and I just laughed at it and I said, Bob must have either been kidding you or, ignore it. You look fantastic. And, but other than that, I hated to go home to go to sleep every night. I wanted to keep going all the time. I was having so much fun directing it and working with all these people, and especially Elvis, who was, we could have had 300,000 people, screaming their heads off in an arena. And he gave the same performance to this basically handful of audience that we had. And it was phenomenal to see him working so hard and really in every moment, every minute of what we taped, he was giving it 100% of his talent and his energy. And I think it came off. I think it shocked a lot of people. There was one comment in the documentary that I was tickled when, one of our guests said, frankly, when I tuned in, I thought it would suck, And I couldn't believe that what I was seeing, and I had a feeling a lot of people felt that way, that they weren't anticipating, especially we're sponsored by Singer sewing machines with little old ladies all across America going to these sewing centers. And, so I think the anticipation of what's Elvis going to do for an hour. And even that is amazing because in the 60s, an hour special was really only about 40 some minutes of entertainment. The rest was filled up with commercials and public service announcements and so forth. And I had 2 hours of this improv platinum gold, incredible material. And in the 60 minutes, there was no way to get it into the show with the big production numbers. So I went to NBC. Tom Sarnoff was running it at the time. I went to the sponsor at the Singer, and I begged them. I said, I'm going to put together by myself a 90-minute version. And I want you to buy an extra half hour of commercial time so we can air the 90-minute. And that way I can get at least a half hour of improv into the special. And they both turned me down. And as a result, there were a lot of stories, but they took out the bordello sequence, which they thought was too risque and offensive to the youth of America. There were lots of battles going on behind the scenes. And, and by accident, after Elvis passed away, NBC made this decision that they wanted to air 3 hours, get Ann Margaret to host it, and also put it back to back with Marty Pacetta's Aloha special that Elvis did. And whoever they sent down to get the 60-minute master probably was a gopher and had no clue what happened in 1968. Probably wasn't even employed by NBC at the time. He went down to the basement where they stored all of the master tapes and so forth. And he saw Elvis master and he pulled it, not realizing he pulled the wrong tape. He pulled my 90-minute edited version. And that's what they aired. And I don't know if they destroyed it or whatever, but they've never aired the 60-minute one again. All these years they've been playing my 90-minute edit, which they never even ordered or asked me to do. I did that on my own.
That's amazing. But the great thing, whatever you've done in your career, it's like you resurrected Elvis in 68, and it must have been, how can I say, when the special aired, can you remember what the excitement was and what it was like at NBC after the special aired?
To be honest with you, I don't. I mean, my entire time with Elvis Presley was the day I met him at my office to the day we said goodbye for the last time after, he'd agreed to come to Bill Ballou, our costume designer's apartment in Hollywood, and have a beer and pizza. So it was really a case of where, I did go see him in Las Vegas in 1969. I thought he was fantastic. And then I went back a year later to see him again out of my own curiosity. And I knew at that moment it was over. I knew he no longer was enjoying being in Las Vegas. He even was performing more for the orchestra behind him than he was the audience in front of him, though I'm sure the audience didn't realize that. It was sad to me. I mean, it was very Shakespearean, and he shouldn't have died so young in life. And I know he never fulfilled any of what he was in his own head with me planning on doing after we finished the 68 special. And if it was a success, he wanted to go around the world and meet all his fans, and he wanted to do things that he had been denied for his whole youth and career. And I said, I hear you, Elvis, but I don't know if you're strong enough to stand up to Colonel Parker, because I'd seen a few incidents how Parker dominated him. And I think Elvis, in the back of his mind, realized the Colonel had taken his family out of poverty at the very beginning of their relationship. And I think the Colonel was a lot more a promoter than he was a manager. I don't think he even told me when I first met him, he said, I guess he was the booker on the Louisiana Hayride live performances by basically country artists, and they booked Elvis. And Colonel told me that I never looked at the stage to see Elvis Presley. I just was mesmerized by all these blondes in the audience with bouffant hairdos and blue eyes, and they were just squirming in their seats and screaming and yelling. And I said, who's ever making them do that, referring obviously to Elvis, is the person I want to get involved with. And that's when he went to RCA and convinced him to give him $25,000, I think it was, to buy his contract, from Sam Phillips. I've been so lucky in my career to do so many different type shows. One of my favorites was with one of your favorites in Australia, Olivia Newton-John, and ABBA and Andy Gibb. I have great memories of working with the three of them and them doing backgrounds for each other, which I thought was fantastic. When it came time to do backgrounds, normally you hire professional background singers, and I didn't hire any of them. I just said, why don't you guys do your own backgrounds for each other? And they did and loved it. And it was a great experience. And unfortunately, with two of the three acts, we've lost Olivia and Andy. And but there were major talents. And as I said, my career has been very eclectic. I've done drama. I've done children's shows like Pee-wee's Playhouse. I was executive producer of. It was a very successful children's show in America. And
Steve, we got to mention my favorite, Gilligan's Island. All right, you're a legend for that. All right.
I have to thank the opportunity to do Gilligan's Island. I did 2 episodes of that. But the real exciting part was I wanted to learn film as opposed to electronic cameras. And Gilligan's Island was shot on 35 millimeter film with a great DP, director of photography, Dick Rawlings. And he taught me a whole lot when it came to lenses and tricks of the trade that you can only learn from your crew members. I mean, they are my educators throughout my career. I can honestly say, with all the shows I've done, and probably in the hundreds now, I've learned so much on each and every one from the people that I have worked with behind the camera. They've been so generous with their talent and sharing it with me, and it's only made me a stronger and better director.
I just want to thank you so much for being on the Plastic EP show. And I also want to say the world salutes you, Steve, for all the great films that you made, documentaries, the Tammy Show, as I said, Gilligan's Island, everything you've done. And I want everyone to go out there and see Reinventing Elvis, the 68 comeback documentary film. But not only that, I want them to go out and buy your fantastic book, The Elvis 68 Comeback, the story behind the special. Everyone go out and buy that. And Steve Binder, the world salutes you. We love you, man.